Okay, question 13 from the farming paper is a compare and contrast question. So compare the similarities and differences. They won't often use the phrase compare and contrast. For some strange reason, they're a bit obsessed with just calling it compare. But here they've helped us out by saying similarities and differences. You can always bear in mind, if you're asked to compare, you can look at what's the same and what's different. Here we're looking at two things. We're looking for differences in the farming itself and attitudes to animals. So we're looking for two separate things. It might be that there's sort of 5 to say about each, or it might be that there's a lot more to say about one than the other. But important that we know we're looking for two different things. Also important that we get the text right, so text D and text E. Differences in the farming, differences in the attitudes to animals. Let's have a look through. Differences in the farming. Catching sheep is exhausting. Right, well that kind of summarises what the farming is like. It's exhausting. Animals are quick on their feet. Yep, I've done all this. Still exhausting. Exhausting. We used all of this for an earlier question. Doing it herself saves Jenny the cost of another helper. Okay, so we've got farming here. We could say something about she's trying to save money. She's trying to do as much as she can herself. Allows her to catch as she prefers to. Right, this is definitely about attitudes to the animals, isn't it? How she wants to treat them. And here we go, as gently as possible. So we'll just highlight gently. That's the key word here. Her arms around the animals rather than digging her fingers into their wool. She hates to see sheep held like that. Imagining it must be like being dragged by the hair. So I suppose what she's doing there is she's trying to empathise with the animals, isn't she? She's trying to imagine how she'd feel if she were treated the way that some of them are. So I'm just going to highlight particularly that word imagining. But imagining it must be like being dragged by the hair. She tries to swallow her distress. Okay, distress could be a useful word there. Sometimes it blurts out. Careful, you've hurt her. The men muzzle their frustration, try to do as she asks. So if they're frustrated when she cries, careful, you'll hurt her, the men treat the animals very differently to, what's her name? Jenny. She works all day in the narrow race. Okay, that's the farming itself. It's a day-long job. She works all day. Talking to the beast, trying to soothe them. Okay, that's similar to what we said up here about gently. She sticks at it, and as her strength wanes, the shearers take pity, reaching over into the race as she prevents each captive, hauling them up over the barrier. Not much there, I don't think. First day is tiring, but the next is a marathon. 193 ewes caught. So that's the farming. It's on quite a big scale. So I'm going to highlight marathon, 193 ewes caught. Okay, that's the longer text. So probably what I'm looking for in the shorter text are the similarities and differences to what I picked up here. Let's see what we've got. Away beyond the Kopje. Okay, so strange word. Small hill. African setting. Where are we here? Sheep farm. Okay. herded the ewes and the lambs. Okay, so both of these are sheep farms. Simple point, but be silly not to talk about it. It's a similarity. Small and dusty herd. Right, here it was 193 ewes caught in a day. So it sounds like this herd's much bigger. So a contrast would be the size of the herd. Dusty herd. Dusty here. No, it doesn't really say very much, does it, about the land? He's watching his son herding sheep. Okay. So Waldo, his son, we've got a family working here, whereas all we hear about in here is Jenny and the shearers who don't see things the same way she does. So actually we might want to highlight the fact that it's Waldo, the farmer's son, who seems to be doing most of the work here. So Waldo wore a hat that was too large, which had sunk down to his eyes, concealing completely the silky black curls. Nothing there yet, really. His flock gave him little trouble. Well, that's very different, isn't it? We've just heard it was back-breaking work for Jenny. It was too hot for them to move far. Well, the other ones were moving all over the place, jumping around. They gathered around every little bush as though they hoped to find shade and stood there motionless in clumps. So, backing up the point, it was too hot for them to move far. Okay, there's quite a lot there then. So let's just check. First point, this one was exhausting. This one is gave him little trouble. So let's add in a text box and we can get to work on our answer. So here we're talking about the farming. So the farming work seems very different in the two texts. Right, I want a quick way of explaining which text is which. So for Jenny, the work is tiring and, let's drop in the quote, what did she call it? Exhausting, yep. It's tiring, I was going to use backbreaking, but exhausting. Whereas for, no, it's Waldo. Whereas for Waldo, what's the quote? They gave him little trouble. Whereas for Waldo, his sheep gave him little trouble. Right, word sheep's just reminded me there that I've got to explain that both farms are sheep farm. No, actually they're not. Both farmers are involved in looking after sheep, but the experiences seem very different. Okay, so I'm hoping so far I'll get credit for this difference that I've spotted. Jenny work is tiring. Waldo, it's pretty straightforward, it's quite easy. I'm just going to show that's a quote. And then hopefully I'll get credit for the similarity. Both are looking after sheep. Quite a simple point, but I don't want to miss it on the mark. Let's go back. So we've talked about exhausting. Next point we had here was Jenny wants to avoid the cost of another helper. So she's working, doing a lot of the work herself, isn't it? So that follows on quite nicely from what we've just said. Jenny wants to do lots of the work herself to save costs. Whereas, so I want a That's a good contrasting connective, whereas Waldo is the farmer's son, so is working on the farmer's behalf. That's a difference in the farming. Okay, back to text D. Oh yeah, now we're on to her and the way that she likes to treat the animals. So the key word here is gently. Jenny likes to treat the animals, gently. And I'm going to back that up with that bit about empathy. Yeah, imagining it must be like being dragged with the hair. And empathizes with the sheep, if they are treated roughly. Then I'm going to drop my quote in, imagining it must be like being, was it dragged or grabbed? Like being dragged. Dragged by the hair. Right, how does that compare? We don't get any sense really that he's too bothered about them. He seems quite relaxed. They gave him little trouble. We haven't really got like an emotional connection like we have with Jenny. So let's say that for Waldo, there doesn't seem to be any emotional connection with the animals. Okay, so again, back to Jenny. She works all day. Doesn't really tell us that, so might not be all that helpful. But we've got this bit about 193 ewes caught, and this bit about the small and dusty herd. So Jenny's herd sounds very large because she shears, what's the number again? 193 ewes. In a single day. In contrast, what was it called? Small and dusty herd. So in contrast, Waldo and his father have a small and dusty herd. So the farming seems to be on a much smaller scale. Right, happy with that for 5 marks for sure.